Hello, friends. I'm Professor Filip Kovacevic, and this is the 12th edition of the Russian newspaper's Monitor. I hope you are doing well today. Let me personally wish you happy holidays and excellent new year. The best is yet to come here at Newsbud. Thank you for giving us your support. We have a lot of great things coming for you in the new year. So let's begin our weekly look at the front page news in the Russian newspapers. We'll begin with Rossiyskaya Gazeta, the Russian government-owned newspaper, the edition for December 20th, 2016. This is one day after the Russian ambassador to Turkey, Andrei Karlov, was brutally assassinated at the opening of a photo exhibition in Ankara. But there is not a single mention of that on the front page. This is very curious. The murder happened in the evening of December 19th, and there appears to have been enough time to write a story about it, or at least mention it briefly. In addition, other Russian daily newspapers, such as Izvestia and Komsomolskaya, in their editions for December 20th, have this news on the front page. So, why did the Russian government decide to keep its own newspaper silent on this matter? Why did they not want to discuss it right away and give their own editorial take on it? The obvious fact is that this was a huge and painful blow to the Russian diplomatic and security apparatus. Even though the host country, in this case Turkey, is responsible for guaranteeing the safety of all foreign diplomatic personnel on its territory, it is clear that the Russian government should have done more to protect its chief diplomat. Karlov was one of the most senior officials in the Russian foreign ministry, who was over the years charged with very delicate tasks, considering that he was previously the ambassador to North Korea. This could also be a part of the reason why he, in particular, was selected for assassination. However, even his activities in Turkey were dangerous enough in the current context. With all the anti-Russian emotions running high in some circles in Turkey related to the situation in Aleppo and Syria in general, why was Karlov not placed under a more elaborate and careful security protection? In my opinion, it seems likely that not only the Turkish own forces, but also the Russian security network in Turkey has been infiltrated by the double agents who created a false sense of security. This is something that the Russian intelligence agencies, in particular the SVR, will have to take a long and hard look at. The new SVR chief, Sergei Narishkin, Putin's longtime KGB colleague and friend, who assumed the position only 2.5 months ago, will obviously have plenty of work to do. As I see it, his first step should be a thorough investigation of the Russian intelligence personnel in Turkey and their networks of informants, as well as the replacement and demotion of those officials on whose watch the assassination happened. His actions should send a clear message to all the corrupt, inefficient, and lazy individuals within the Russian intelligence community that their time is up. Otherwise, events like this might soon be repeated elsewhere. While it does not mention Karlov's assassination, the edition of Rossiyskaya Gazeta for December 20th, carries a front-page story dealing with two current Russian geopolitical opponents, Ukraine and Poland. The article is located in the middle of the front page, and the title is, "How Can a Bandit Be a Hero?" The subtitle explains that only 27% of the Polish citizens feel sympathy for the Ukrainians. The article reports that the Ukrainian ambassador in Poland, Andrei Karlov, recently accused the Russians of trying to stir up a conflict between the Poles and the Ukrainians. The reference is made to the December 10th, 2016 anti-Ukrainian march in the Polish border city of Przemyśl, during which the participants chanted slogans about the Polish Lvov, and Lvov is a city in Ukraine, and death to the Ukrainians. The article reports that such antagonistic attitudes are also reflected in the public opinion polls conducted by the Polish Center for Public Opinion Research. According to the center, the Polish citizens are most positively inclined toward the Czechs, Slovaks, and Italians, and the least toward their eastern neighbors, the Ukrainians, Russians, and Belarusians. Regarding the Ukrainians, 27% of the Poles feel sympathy, 34% antipathy, and 33% are indifferent. Antipathy is defined as a deep-seated feeling of dislike. According to the article, the number of those who feel sympathy has declined by 9% within the last year. This is so even though the ruling political elites in Poland, for geopolitical reasons that go much beyond Poland, did all they could to create a positive atmosphere toward Ukraine in the Polish population. The article emphasizes that Poland was the first country in the world which recognized the independence of Ukraine on December 2nd, 1991, even before the Soviet Union was officially dissolved, which of course shows the extent to which the Atlanticist faction in Europe was willing to violate all international norms in order to realize its agenda. In celebration of the 25th anniversary of this event, the Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko visited Poland and met with the Polish President Andrzej Duda. Duda stated that Poland fully supported Ukraine, even though the interpretations of certain tragic historical events that took place between the two populations remained unreconciled. What is implied here is the reference to the anti-Ukrainian terror of the Polish rule over the Volyn and Galicia provinces after the World War I, and the subsequent anti-Polish pogroms of the Ukrainian nationalists and fascists during the World War II. According to the Polish historians, about 100,000 Ukrainian citizens, including women and children, were killed in the period from 1943 to 1945 by the military forces under the control of Stepan Bandera, who is considered a national hero by the Kiev government. There are many supporters of the ruling Polish Law and Justice Party who consider Bandera and his collaborators war criminals and perpetrators of genocide. They wrote an open letter to the President Duda demanding that the key condition for the Polish assistance to Ukraine should be the recognition by the Ukrainian government of the war crimes committed by Bandera, the formal apology, and the compensation for the victims' families. But how realistic can this be if the Ukrainian government is considering Bandera a hero and builds monuments to him all across Ukraine? In addition, the deputy of the Ukrainian parliament, Oleg Musi, demanded that the Polish consul in Lvov, Veslav Mazura, be declared persona non grata in Ukraine for his statement that Bandera was a bandit. The Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs called Mazura to Kiev for explanation and stated that Mazura expressed his regret at his statement and said that he would leave historical topics to historians. Still, it is clear that tensions exist and that very often they bubble to the surface because the underlying issues have not been resolved. Several years ago, the Polish parliament considered a declaration to declare a resolution to declare what happened during World War II to the Polish population at the hands of Bandera, a genocide. However, under the intense pressure of the Atlanticist faction led by then Foreign Minister Radoslav Sikorski, the deputies were persuaded that such formulation would hurt the European future of Ukraine and help the Russian President Vladimir Putin. By the way, Sikorski's wife, Anne Applebaum, as a Washington Post columnist, has been one of the most vocal purveyors of Russophobia in the United States. And so the key formulation of the resolution was watered down to ethnic cleansing with elements of genocide. However, as one can see from the recent march in Peremyshl, this has done little to calm the animosities. The article concludes with a discussion of the impact that the Polish historical film, Volyn, about the massacres of the Poles by Bandera's forces, which came out this fall, had on the increasing tensions between ordinary Poles and Ukrainians, tens of thousands of whom came to Poland as refugees since 2014. It is clear that the Polish nationalist feeling is on the rise and may lead to violent incidents in the future as well. In my opinion, the purpose of this article is to demonstrate that it is not all well within the current anti-Russian front in Eastern Europe. The anti-Russian coalition put together by NATO, the CIA, the MI6, and other Western intelligence agencies shows deep cracks based on historical traumas which have never been resolved. The threat of the alleged Russian attack is not enough to push under the rug the bloody demons of the past and make them disappear. The only hope for long-term stability in this part of the world is the Ukrainian political and economic cooperation with both the Poles and the Russians. But before this can happen, the true nature of Bandera's agenda must be acknowledged and atoned for. Now, let's look at the front page of Izvestia, the moderate pro-government newspaper, the edition for December 20th, 2016. On the top of the front page, there is a photo of the assassinated Russian ambassador Andrei Karlov, taken probably just moments before his brutal death. His killer is standing behind his back, and this makes the photograph itself one of the most eerie in the history of photography. The title of the article is "The Killer Was Afraid to Look in the Eye." The subtitle explains that the Russian ambassador was killed by being shot in the back. The article begins by giving the facts of the ambassador's murder. It states that the ambassador was killed while giving a speech at the opening of the photo exhibition called "Russia Through the Eyes of the Turks." This exhibition was a segment in the program of the more intensive Russo-Turkish cultural exchange and cooperation. And the idea behind it was to bring the two peoples together, something that the killer and those who sent and trained him obviously wanted to prevent. The article reports that the killer fired several bullets into the ambassador and that he was yelling "Aleppo" It also knows that he himself was killed soon afterwards by a Turkish policeman. This, I think, was either a setup or a grave mistake. He should have been caught alive. It would have been easier to discover who was behind the murder. The article quotes the former Russian ambassador to Turkey, Pyotr Stegny, who was based in Turkey from 2003 to 2007, saying that, in his opinion, those responsible for this terrorist act were either the militants of the Islamic State or radical Turkish nationalists. He added that he knew Karlov really well, and that Karlov was a bright, well-mannered person with high professional qualities. Stegny thought that the planners of the assassination should be sought among those who dislike the increasingly friendly relations between Russia and Turkey, especially regarding Syria and the Middle East in general, and in whose interest it was for Russia and Turkey to make war. According to Stegny, in addition to the embassy in Ankara, there are 3 Russian consulates in Turkey, in Istanbul, in Antalya, and in Trabzon, and they're always well protected. However, he stated his doubts that this time around the protection was at the highest level. There was no orange alarm, which, as I said earlier, demonstrates a lapse in the necessary Russian security and intelligence procedures. The statement of the spokeswoman of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Maria Zakharova, is also quoted in the article. She stated that the Russians were closely collaborating with the Turkish investigative agencies and that they would soon bring up the question of the joint fight against international terrorism at the Security Council of the United Nations. The chairman of the International Affairs Committee in the Duma, the lower house of the Russian parliament, Leonid Slutsky, stated that those who wanted to create animosity between Russia and Turkey would not succeed. He said that at this time it is extremely important not to have another spike in tensions between the two countries, because that was precisely what their opponents wanted, and that was why they planned and executed this monstrous deed. A member of the Defense Committee in the upper house of the Russian parliament, the Federation Council, Alexei Pushkov, agreed with Slutsky and added that, in his opinion, the government of Turkey had nothing to do with this tragic event. He believed that the assassination was organized by those political circles in Turkey which supported the anti-Assad militants in Aleppo. He also stated that these radical circles were driven by anti-Russian sentiments and that they represent a big problem for the Turkish society in general. They are behind many other terrorist attacks on the Turkish territory. Pushkov concluded that not only the Russian diplomats and journalists, but also ordinary Russian tourists might be in danger, and that therefore the Turkish government should redouble its efforts in guaranteeing their safety. In my opinion, this article provides a solid overview of the Russian political elite's reaction to the assassination of the ambassador Karlov. It is clear that this terrorist act will not derail the Russian-Turkish cooperation, which was the intention of its planners and financiers, and in fact may end up making it stronger. However, much more must be done on the intelligence collection and counterintelligence fronts by both the Russians and the Turks in order to prevent these kinds of attacks happening in the future. In addition, the Russian citizens need to be assured by the Turkish government that they can safely spend their holiday vacations in Turkey. On the page 3 of the same edition of Izvestia, what a surprise! There is a familiar face from the alternative media sphere. Under the title, "Under Trump, the US will be much less of a threat," it is an interview with Paul Craig Roberts, the former Reagan administration official and a well-known US foreign policy critic. The occasion is his alleged request to the Russian President Vladimir Putin for granting him the Russian citizenship. When asked directly about the request, Roberts replied that his column, entitled "Dear President Putin," was intended to be a satire. He wanted to provide an occasion for the anti-Russian US mainstream media to have some fun. However, he said that if Putin truly offered him Russian citizenship, he would be glad to accept it. Roberts also stated that he expected the Russian-American relations to be better under Trump than they would have been under Hillary Clinton. According to him, this was so because Trump respected President Putin and has never wanted to demonize Russia. In addition, Roberts emphasized that Trump said that he saw no reason why there should be conflict between Moscow and Washington. His appointee for the Secretary of State is Rex Tillerson, the person who, according to Roberts, is in good relations with Putin and knows Russia. In terms of concrete steps that Trump could take in order to develop good relations with Putin, Roberts suggested that Trump should reverse the existing US policy on Ukraine and take into consideration the Russian national security interests. Overall, according to Roberts, Trump will primarily focus on defending the economic interests of the United States. Trump never shared the neocon insistence on the US global military hegemony, and so his administration will be less threatening for the world. Roberts also stated that Trump was right on questioning NATO. Roberts agreed that there was no reason for NATO's continued existence, considering that the threat of communism was long gone. However, he said that he expected a fierce pushback against Trump by NATO officials and their academic and media cronies in the United States and Europe, because a lot of cushy jobs are about to be endangered. Roberts concluded the interview by criticizing the one-sidedness and deep state co-optation of the US mainstream media. He stated that the US media became the ministry of propaganda, ready and willing to lie to the American people in order to justify imperial wars of the corrupt political class, whether during the George W. Bush or Barack Obama administrations. In my opinion, the prominent positioning of an interview with Roberts on page 3 of a daily newspaper underscores the extent to which the Russian pro-government media is eager to stress the existence of allies abroad, especially in the United States. While this is obviously done for domestic political purposes and the legitimization of Putin's foreign policy decisions, it does not take away from the importance of Roberts' message of cooperation as opposed to confrontation among the two biggest nuclear powers in the world. However, it is curious to me that the question of the alleged Russian hacking of the United States elections was altogether avoided in the interview. I'm sure that Roberts would have rejected the issue of hacking as nonsense, as a sign of Democrats being sore losers. This would be yet another plus for the Russians. But he was not even given a chance. Why? Perhaps this unwillingness to go there and touch this topic is a symptom of something. Could it be a guilty conscience? Now, let's go to the front page of Nezavisimaya Gazeta, the middle-of-the-road newspaper, the edition for December 22nd, 2016. In the middle of the front page, there is an article entitled, "In the Middle East, New Arrangement of the Spheres of Influence." The subtitle explains that the assassination of the Russian ambassador in Turkey is being linked to the rage of the Sunni powers in the region. The photo accompanying the article shows the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov shaking hands with the Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu before their meeting in Moscow a day before. The article states that the US State Department refuses to admit that the negotiations in the format Russia, Iran, Turkey demonstrate the loss of the US influence in the Middle East. According to the article, analysts claim that this in fact is the case. The US is being replaced by Russia as the key great power in the Middle East, and this irritates many Sunni centers of power in the region. The assassination of Andrei Karlov is a tragic proof of that, according to the article. The article reports that the official spokesman of the US State Department, John Kirby, who is counting his last days on the job, said that the Secretary of State, John Kerry, did not believe that the ongoing negotiations between Russia, Turkey, and Iran on Syria, from which the US is excluded, meant that the United States was losing the dominant position in the Middle East. He stated that the State Department welcomed all talks which could lead to the peaceful resolution of the Syrian conflict, whether they included the United States or not. Kirby stressed that Kerry recently visited Saudi Arabia, which obviously also had a stake in Syria. The article also refers to the recent report in the Wall Street Journal, which claimed that Russia was increasingly replacing the United States as an indispensable player in the Middle East. However, this report also cautioned that while the increased geopolitical influence had many positive aspects, it had the negative side as well. The negative side refers to the fact of becoming more of a target of choice for those in the Islamic world who do not welcome the meddling of the outsiders. Those, for instance, who are behind the assassination of Karlov. The article reports the Iraqi TV channel Al Sumariya, which claimed that the group responsible for Karlov's assassination was the coalition of Jebhat Fatah al-Sham, which is a new name for the Al-Nusra Front, and Ahrar am-Sham. These two groups positioned themselves as the defenders of the Sunni population from the forces of the Syrian government and the Russian military. These groups have in the past been supported by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and indirectly by the CIA. However, some analysts contacted by Nezavisimaya Gazeta for this article disagreed. For instance, Nikolai Kozhanov, who is an associate in the Russian Eurasian program of the British geopolitical think tank Chatham House, thought that it was too early to put the blame on the radical Sunni groups. He stated that there were Sunnis also fighting on the side of al-Assad, and that there could be other radical groups which disliked the heavy Russian military involvement in the region. Kozhanov also stated that Russia did not have enough economic and political capabilities to replace the United States as the key great power in the Middle East. In his opinion, the current Russian prevalence in the Middle East was the result of several mistakes made by the current US presidential administration, but that this state of affairs would not last for very long. The United States would be back in full force very soon. Now, what else to expect from a Chatham House expert than these kinds of claims? Both the Chatham House as well as its US counterpart, the Council on Foreign Relations, are still in denial of the fact that the world has become multipolar and that the United States will never again be in the position of hegemonic global influence as it was in the 1990s. The other analyst cited in the article, Alexander Ignatenko from the Institute for Religion and Politics, stated that the new embryonic power bloc in the Middle East, which could potentially push the United States out, was the Moscow-Tehran-Ankara axis. However, at this time, this axis is still very fragile, which does not mean that intense diplomatic efforts are not being made to strengthen it. The recent meeting of the 3 foreign ministers in Moscow is an important step in this direction. According to Ignatenko, it is very possible that this format, which led to the victory in the Battle for Aleppo, may be able to provide a workable plan for the resolution of the entire Syrian conflict. Of course, this is something that will be fiercely opposed by Saudi Arabia, by Qatar, and their proxies on the ground in Syria. This is why we may see more attacks on the Russian diplomats and even on the Russian civilians in the future. There are even some indications that those areas which are under control of the Saudi proxies in Syria will form a quasi-government with a new variant of Al-Qaeda to be unleashed upon the world very soon. In my opinion, this article emphasizes both the potential for success and the dangers of the emerging Russia-Iran-Turkey Pact on Syria. It is clear that there are many forces opposed to it, including John Kerry's State Department, which of course they cannot admit publicly. We will have to wait a month or two and see what positions the new Trump administration will take. But if the past is any indicator of the future, the outgoing Obama administration and its agents of influence in the Middle East and Europe will make it very difficult for Trump to make a deal on Syria with the 3 countries involved, at least in the first 6 months, until all the subversives and agents provocateurs within the new administration can be exposed and fired. Lastly today, let's take a look at the Russian semi-tabloid press, the widely popular newspaper Komsomolskaya Pravda, the edition for December 21st, 2016. On the front page, there is a big photograph of the assassinated Russian ambassador Alexei Karlov and the title in big red letters, "Who could be behind the assassination of the Russian ambassador in Turkey?" The subtitle explains that the main article in this edition of the newspaper will examine 4 possible versions. So let's take a look at this article and see what these 4 versions are about. The version number 1 is entitled "The Hand of Gulen." The article reminds its readers that on July 15 this year, a coup attempt took place in Turkey with the intention to overthrow the president Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Erdogan and the Turkish government accused the exiled Turkish cleric Fethullah Gulen of being the mastermind of the coup. Gulen has lived in the United States for the last 17 years. Since the coup attempt, Erdogan has purged thousands of Gulen supporters from government institutions in Turkey. On this issue, the article reports the commentary of Reis Suleymanov, who is an expert on Islam from the Russian Institute of National Strategy. Suleymanov states that this is the version that will be advocated by the Turkish government. Karlov's assassin, Mevlut Mert Altintaş, was fired from his job in the police after the coup attempt because he was suspected of sympathies toward Gulen. However, according to Suleimanov, the purges also affected many innocent people who had no connection to Gulen, but their positions were coveted by Erdogan's allies. In his opinion, this version may be used for domestic political reasons, that is to say, for further purges of the government apparatus from those not loyal enough to Erdogan. The version number 2 is entitled The Syrian Militants. In this case, the article consults the Russian military expert Andrei Sarvein. He says that considering that Russia is taking part in the Syrian conflict on the side of the Syrian government, all the enemies of the government have also directed their animosity toward Russia and its government personnel. For them, anybody working for the Russian government, from the ambassador to the chauffeur or the guard in the embassy, is now the legitimate enemy target. The perpetrator of the crime could also be anybody who identified with any terrorist organization, be that the Islamic State or Al-Qaeda or any other that is less well known in the West. In this respect, it is also important to remember that Karlov was deeply involved in the negotiations with the representatives of the so-called moderate Syrian rebels, many of whom have surrendered their weapons in the last few weeks, leading to a real possibility of the lasting peace in Syria. And so Karlov was obviously hated by those who want to prolong the war. The version number 3 is entitled The Third Party. This third party, according to the experts, is Saudi Arabia. It is deeply unhappy with the emerging Russia-Iran-Turkey axis and the loss of power and influence of its proxy forces in Syria. It therefore might have wanted to perpetrate an act of revenge against its geopolitical opponents. However, if this is true, it would be very short-sighted on the part of Saudi Arabia. What if its opponents prepare a series of retributions? The repressive Saudi regime is already involved in a war in Yemen. Could it really survive the opening of another front? Especially as, in my opinion, its supporters and lobbyists in the US intelligence community, especially in the CIA, including its director, John Brennan, are on the way out. The version number 4 is entitled The American Hawks. On this issue, the article consults with Viktor Olevich, the Russian expert on US foreign policy. Olevich notes that the assassination is advantageous to those in Washington, D.C. who do not want to cooperate with Moscow on the resolution of the Syrian war, and in whose interest it is to break up the emerging Russia-Iran-Turkey consensus on Syria. These individuals also want to create as many geopolitical problems as possible for the incoming Trump administration. Olevich points to a recent statement of the US Secretary of State John Kerry, who said that the reason the United States negotiations with Russia over Aleppo broke down was the existence of a disagreement among several high-level officials within the Obama administration. He thinks that behind this disagreement was the hardline CIA and State Department faction. And so, there are several key suspects and groups who could be behind the assassination, or perhaps all of them were coordinated in some way. The coming days will no doubt bring more information to light. The key point, in my opinion, is that whoever was behind it ended up failing in attaining his primary geopolitical goal, to destroy the geopolitical convergence of Russia and Turkey. This, of course, is not to say that these nefarious forces will stop. No doubt they are already planning their next terrorist attack, probably on the Russian soil, but the other side is preparing their answer too, and it will be harsh. Dear friends, this is all for today. Thank you for your time. Be cool and stay cool until the next edition of the Russian newspaper's Monitor.
If you found this video useful, share it. Newsbud presentations are only made possible by our viewers. Subscribe to newsbud.com today to become part of the Newsbud community, where soon you will find exclusive content only available to our subscribers.